They say the sword is mightier than the pen, but what about a sword shaped like a pen? Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Now I had these letter opener kits lying around, and if you've ever turned things, you know that once you have a kit, you've got to turn it. And so I've been wanting to kind of experiment with it and do some fun things. This one is white oak, curly white oak, and I really like how that one came out. This one's ebony and was a huge challenge for me, and I'll get into that in the future. But I didn't want to make another video about turning something. Everyone has seen that video about turning a pen or a letter opener. I want to talk about more of how exactly do you go about turning on a spring pull lathe. And I kind of made this mandrel to fit for that, and I want to talk about that in particular, and then go into some of the challenges that I had with building this. So yeah, let's dive in. First, let's take a look at this mandrel. Now before I had wrapped rope around either end and then wrapped it with tape to kind of create these end caps that the guide rope won't come off. Now I want to actually use these fender washers to create an end cap on either end of the, well, what would have been the taper. It's now going to be what holds the rope. And this will allow it to stay in place in between these two. Now I didn't just want the rough housing from this, so I'm going to be using some epoxy dough. This is a JB Weld stuff. I'll try and leave a link to it down below. But it's a putty that you can actually put in and shape. So I can actually make this kind of like spool shape on the end. And if I really wanted to, I could come back through with the lathe and actually shape it up, but I really don't need to. It just needs to be something that stops the rope from either end. Now, if I really wanted to, what I would end up doing is having someone mill a metal spool like this with a thread in the end for the mandrel to slide into, but this actually works fairly well. The last thing I want to do is create a dimple in the one end that will hold the live center, and this way I know it's at exactly 60 degrees, so it creates a nice little housing. Now that we have that actually created, I'll show you how that all works. We can actually go to making these blanks. Now I have this piece of white oak, curly white oak, that I am in love with. I've been saving it for just this usage. And I also have a piece of ebony that I want to do this with. I'm going to rough up the brass tube with some sandpaper, cover it with CA glue, and then slide it down inside the hole. And with it down in there, it should stay put. And I found if you sand it nicely with the CA glue, will hold it for a very long time. The next thing I want to do is start the roughing process. This takes the most time on the spring pull lathe, so if you can get it close to it and get rid of those corners, I find just taking it down to kind of an octagonal shape really helps and makes this move a lot faster. Now that we have these two blanks ready to go, we can put them in the lathe. Now I'm going to be experimenting with different ways of holding them. I thought at first I might be able to do both at the same time if I use these CA glue holders. But yeah, this is the first fail. It doesn't quite do it. One of the problems is that as it goes forward and backward, the screw on the end will loosen up. And every time it goes in reverse, that screw loosens up a little bit more. And then the nylon on that, giving it a little bit of leeway, allows these to loosen up very quickly. So, you know, just be able to work for a few seconds and then find them loose already. So, next thing I wanted to try is spacing them out a little bit differently so that the screw on the end is closer to the workpiece. So I put another bushing in there at the beginning and took out the nylons. But that was still slipping. And what I finally ended up doing was using the compression fitting to hold it in place, and then slide it in. Now I wasn't able to do both pieces on this, so I had to do one at a time. But oh well, it worked fairly well. And I have another blank on there just to use as a larger bushing to push it closer to the end, because I like working away from the rope if possible. But yeah, it actually worked out fairly well. Now the next problem I came up to is the splitting on this. This piece of ebony was just a pain, and when it stops you can see that split. I was constantly filling that with epoxy and CA glue and hoping that it stays together, and in the end it did stay together. It took a good bit of work to keep it in place and work it down. Just a lot of tense moments. I actually had a piece of it fly off at one point, but I was able to glue it back on and keep going. Not a happy day, but it worked out fairly well. Once I get it down to the shape I want, I can sand it, and I love using these the sanding bows. I did a video recently on making these, and I now have them in a set of 3 different grits, so I can actually go through this very quickly. And I always have another piece of sandpaper ready to go. You can just roll it along the bow and keep working. After that, I want to put a CA finish on it, and this piece of white oak really shows it up well. The ebony is just so pure black, it just almost looks like epoxy. It almost looks like a plastic. But I just put on 3 coats like this, just quickly wipe it on and back off. And I keep going. You can see I'm using the plastic nylon pieces on either end so that it won't glue to the frame if you're just using the steel. I've had a problem with that a couple times. So I finally picked up a pair of these nylon bushings. And after 3 coats of CA glue, I'll then move on to the micro mesh and buff it down to a really nice shine. Sometimes I'll do the micro mesh and then go and put another 3 coats on and another micro mesh. I've done that as much as 3 times total, so 6 total coats of CA and micro mesh in between 3 and 6. But in this case, I think I just did the initial 3 CA glue and then micro mesh, and it's not quite as built up and plasticky looking. It just looks more like a glossy piece of wood, and I really love this particular piece. It came out beautifully. The same thing with the ebony. Went very, very well. I forgot to put the plastic bushings on this one. Thankfully, it came off fairly well. But hitting the camera with the treadle. Oops. Next thing we can do is push all this together. Now this kit comes with this end cap on the end that needs to be assembled first. This way you can get different colors and different fittings. I really wanted to keep the black on there to match the ebony, and it went fairly well. This is the place where things can really go wrong if it goes in kittywampus. It can bust out the side and ruin all the work you've done. Having a pin press is really useful, but in this case it works fairly well. Yes, I know the leather is coming loose on my vise. Oh well, I'll glue it back on here soon. Last thing is I can glue in the screw in the blade, and then we have our pins. And I am really happy with how these came out. Just absolutely beautiful, and just, yeah, you can see I'm happy. So not every day in the shop is happy. Sometimes you just want to give up, and man, I wanted to give up on this probably 3 or 4 times. I put it down, I set it aside, and then a half an hour later I came back and put myself into it, said, no, I'm not going to let this beat me. I'm going to get it done. And in the end, I'm really happy with it. The epoxy points in it that came through almost make it look like marble. I'm kind of happy with how it came out. It was far better than I was expecting about halfway through. And the ebony on this is just pure jet black, really beautiful. I really like how the white oak came out. The curl in that is just incredible. Curly white oak is just one of those things in nature that is worth its weight in gold and a little more. So I hope you like this. Not every day in the shop is great. You just got to fight through it and have a little bit of fun. Learn what you can and move on. So this is a fun experiment for me. I do want to say thank you to the patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to find out more about that or help out, this channel is based almost solely off of Patreon. So if you'd like to help out with that, you can do so right down there. Also, if you'd like to subscribe and see some behind the scenes footage, you can do that as well. That's about it for today. And until next time, have a wonderful day.